Hello, everyone, and thank you to the Cloud Infrastructure in 2021 Protecting and Accelerating the Model Business Panel. We have an exciting discussion lined up around a lot of great topics like cloud strategies, hybrid multiple, essential cloud capabilities, how to deal with cloud cost and cloud cost management, and many others. We've got a great panel with us today. My name is Terry Brennan. I'm with Orsi Software and I'm managing director for them. Focus in agile, cloud, DevOps, and helping clients sort of navigate through that process. I'm sorry, with my next panelist.
Yes, I can do a short introduction. My name is Tom Christensen. I work for Hitachi Vantara, and we are a company that has a strong focus on hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, application modernization, and how to deliver that strategy that makes it possible for our enterprise customers and global customers to begin to adapt cloud into their data center.
I guess it's me. My name is Dan. Dan Khalil. I'm a cloud solutions architect at HashiCorp, and my company essentially makes software for cloud infrastructure. We have software for automation, security, network, and runtime environments. I've been in the industry for the last 10 years, and today work in the partner alliances team here at HashiCorp, and my primary functions are to kind of present our software to our partners and help them onboard into our software ecosystem.
Hello there, I'm Srinivasan. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of Bamboo Cluster. We are focused on bringing the benefits of the cloud to the mid-market. What we define as the mid-market are firms with revenues between 50 million and 500 million in revenues. We are both in AWS and Microsoft Azure partners and have partnerships with MSPs such as SingleHop, which has now become INAP, and folks like RingCentral. I've spent nearly 20 years with the technology industry, half of it with the technology vendors such as IBM and Oracle, and the other half with mid-market service providers and startups, including the one I'm currently involved with. Today, I'm going to try and bring the mid-market perspective on how the cloud is enabling and accelerating businesses in this segment of the market. Good to meet you all.
So I guess it's my turn. So I'm Stefan Esteves. I'm the product marketing director for Splunk in EMEA, as you can hear, unfortunately. Splunk basically is a data platform, right? So we break the data silos and we help companies to extract value out of data with a lot of different use cases. Monitoring, AIOps, APM solution, whatever, security, you name it, so many of those. And prior to that, I spent almost 20 years being in product management and product marketing in the cloud industry. So I was on the other part of the fence, actually working for cloud providers before joining Splunk. And happy to be here and have a nice discussion with all of you.
And I'm John Capello. I'm the VP of Product Strategy at Masumi. Masumi is a cloud infrastructure company. We have a file infrastructure that is built completely on the cloud. It is a file system that's built on the object store. It's a global file lock that lives inside of the cloud as well. And we help customers make that transition from a NAS-based file infrastructure that is on-prem or hybrid into a hybrid or all-cloud file infrastructure. I work really closely with AWS and Azure and Google, our big cloud partners, in trying to coordinate our roadmaps and making sure that we're linked in terms of our joint solutions. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that, how customers will use things that are either cloud-native technologies or technologies provided by a single provider, or providing technologies that span across and enable multi-cloud workflows.
Very good. Thanks. And we've got a great panel, and let's go ahead and get started with our discussion. So we're going to kick it off and start actually around cloud strategies and what does that mean in 2021, and maybe what some of the best practices. And I'll just kick it off by one thing I see with clients, and as we work with them, unfortunately, a lot of times the strategy maybe consists of picking a provider, and that may be the extent of that strategy. And usually what we see is we're coming back in after that fact to help clients sort of figure out, okay, how do we really move forward? So when you're putting together and thinking about a cloud strategy, it's a lot more than just figuring out which cloud provider you go with. you need to take into consideration what are your really driving needs, really understand what's driving you to it and how you're going to leverage it. You need to understand, like, how are you going to set it up? How are you going to do things like govern it? How are you going to operate it? How are you going to manage it? What are you going to do about cost? What services are the effective services that you should leverage? And how are you going to manage that? Are you going to open it up wide open for sort of, if you will, the wild, wild west? Anybody can get anything at any time. There's pluses to that, and there's minuses to that. But I think the key part with your cloud strategy is not to think of it just as that provider, but all the enabling pieces, as well as the migration. How will you move to that? When should you move? And we can talk about that in a little bit more detail. But it's certainly a challenge I see a lot of clients run into. Sometimes it starts organically, and they just sort of start moving in that direction, which is fine. But often that starts to take on a sort of a meaning of its own in its own direction. And a lot of times you want to get to where I like to call it, you want flexible delivery, but you want firm control. And that's true in development, and I think it's true in cloud. You want it to be an enabler, but you do want to be able to do it in a purposeful and methodical way. So, if anybody else, other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would like to add a couple of things to that one, because I think it's really about why and the what. Why we're doing this, and then it's definitely about how we're going to do it. And the how is maybe for many of our customers the more simple way to do it. But why are we doing this one? And very often it's really driven by being in a position where you can make money, save money, and stay more competitive as a company. And you really would like these applications to support your business as fast as possible. So it's all about getting the application really fast up running and have a more agile environment that is driving it towards the cloud. And sometimes we realize that line of business in an organization are sometimes looking at the old legacy CIO infrastructure like very slow and not fast enough to adapt to the need that the business has. And then they rush into cloud because it's the Wild West and you can get it really fast and quickly. But then suddenly you realize that the cost is very high, and then you're ending up somewhere in between. So I remember I did a couple of workshops 2 weeks ago in North EMEA. It was in Germany and also in UK and in Scandinavia, where we had 60 CIOs coming in. And one of the CIOs, he was from the financial sector, a global a bank. And he said, during the COVID-19 last year, the UK government, they went on the national TV on Friday, and they announced that they are going to launch what did they call it? I think bounce back bonus scheme, which makes it possible for mid-sized companies to get compensated during the COVID-19. And they said, it will be up running on Monday. And then when you talk to these CIOs, they say, this is really a nightmare. I mean, if I look at the old architecture, application architecture, it suddenly becomes my worst nightmare because I can't create application that fast. And so, the feeling I have is that people are looking more for modern apps and how fast you can spin it up, and also use public cloud for what I would call value-adding stuff. And then, when you get into the how, my experience is that you need to look at where are you right now with your data center and your infrastructure. But you also need to look at the skill gap you have in the organization, and maybe the culture change that needs to take place. In some cases, you need cloud architect. And that actually comes up a lot of other questions. Do we only want to use AWS? Do we want to use Google? Do we want to use Azure? What kind of expertise do we need to have in the organization? And then, once you get all of that into a kind of a strategy document, it's a live document that you need to go back and look at again. And you basically, this is my experience, you need line of business to be part of it as well, to have an influence on, how should your architecture and solution look like. I think I will stop here. I got a lot of other things to say, but maybe it's important to get some more people to say what they think.
Yes.
Well, it's interesting what you're saying, Tom, because it's all about speed and so on, but very often you don't always make the good decision if speed is only the criteria you're looking at, because there are consequences and you have a lot of different choices. And I like to always get back to 2010 when Gartner said there's 5 R's, the 5 R's of the strategy to go to the cloud. So rehost, refactor, revise, rebuild, and replace. And depending on your workload and application, you choose the one you like. And they all have different implications. If you take the classic one, when people want to move into the cloud, they usually do the rehost one, which is now, because they want to look more modern, it's called lift and shift, but it's the same. And the idea is that I take my application and I just move it into the cloud as it is. And it's basically the hardware is someone else's problem, but the application is still the same, which is great because it helps you to require little upfront effort in the migration process, and you migrate fast, right? But the issue is that you don't take the full advantage of the cloud native features and benefits, or your application at the end will cost you more when it's running in the cloud that way. And the opposite, if you want to go the modern way and re-architect or refactor, which means that you're changing your code to adapt to the cloud, yes, you have benefits of taking now the full advantages of the features, and it's more cost effective. But on the other end, the upfront cost can be quite important in the migration, and it's often a very time consuming and resource consuming from a people standpoint to refactor your application. So again, speed is great, but you need to understand the implications. I think later on, when we were preparing this discussion, we will talk about how you get out of the cloud. That's sometimes a consequence. If you don't take the right decision, maybe you will need to step back. But for the moment, we're stepping in. So let's carry on. How we go into the cloud? So I'll start there, but I think it's important to keep in mind there's a lot of different options, and they have consequences. So be careful, and you need to really understand them before making a decision. I don't know if anybody wants to add on that.
Let me just underscore a point that Tom made and that Stefan brought up as well, which was it's so important to get the why down, right? It's so important to know how you're tying your technology strategy to your business strategy, because now more than ever, technology strategy can drive business strategy. It's real value. It's not just a cost center. So if you decide I'm moving this set of applications or I'm moving this infrastructure to the cloud, the lift and shift Stefan's talking about, and it really is a cost issue, then I think the other critical question is like, what time period am I evaluating this over? Is this a 2-year period? Is it a 3-year period? I think that's going to drive a lot of your decisions. If it's about speed to market, if it's about increasing product development cycles, if it's, look, I need to be more competitive, I need to prototype things in 3 months, not in 9 months, then that's a difference of evaluations, and that's going to change the profile of the decisions that you make as well. So I think in that document that Tom's talking about, you've got your strategy document. I think one of those critical things is, here's why we're doing it, and here's how often we're going to evaluate it.
That really seems to tie us all together. And back to that point, you really do need to think through your cloud strategy. I think it just comes through all the conversations, not just picking a provider, and then often the next piece of the strategy is lift and shift. I think to echo Tom's comment earlier, I've sat in front of many COOs, CTOs who are like, what happened? We decided we're going in on cloud. You know, they picked a provider. They didn't really have any migration or operational strategy. Next thing, their costs are just going through the roof, and they've got a real challenge on their hands that they got to figure out how to unwind, which again, sometimes means stepping back. But that cloud strategy is very important now and going forward. So I'll move us on to the next question. So, you know, when we think about cloud strategy, we often hear people start to talk about cloud first strategy. What do you all think that really involves, and how does one go about that?
Yeah, I can try to kick off again. You know, for me, the cloud first strategy, when we met that one 3 years ago, the feeling I got when it was enterprise customers was that they all want to move into cloud. That was some sort of the idea. And then, you know, the more we worked with customers, we suddenly realized that, you know, all the legacy application, they are legacy, no matter where you run it. If you take these application and you move it into cloud, it's still a legacy application, and you don't get the benefit out of it. And I remember that I had a conversation with another big bank, and they came back and they said, you know, we have already done an assessment where we have looked at all our application, also the core application, and we have calculated that it will take around 35 years to make it cloud native and move it into cloud. So we don't think that cloud first strategy is actually about moving legacy application into cloud. It's more about when we create new application, it needs to go through the process of cloud first. And we ask the question, does it make sense to move it into cloud? And if it does make sense, that's where we want to have it. And for some CIOs, it seems like they're using that cloud first to force that thinking into the process rather than, moving everything into cloud. And I basically believe, and I strongly believe, that what is driving this cloud is basically a change in the application architecture. We have seen this monolith approach for many years for BI and ERP systems and other kinds of applications that you create, maybe 10,000 of lines, and it take a very long time to create. And then suddenly when you get into that hypercloud mode with maybe containerized application, you start using microservices or serverless computing, and suddenly, you break down these monolith applications into more like a Lego block concept. And once you establish, that microservice development, you can reuse all these Lego blocks for other applications, and you can basically start moving these into public cloud and use maybe microservice that you don't want to develop because AWS already got it, and then you put it together and then you create the application. So for me, hypercloud, multi-cloud is very often from a technology point of view driven by the application architecture changing towards apps. That's the feeling I have.
Yeah, and just to add on that, I think I like the Lego analogy. The thing is that you don't want Lego to become a Jenga. And that's one of the key issues about microservices, because most of the decisions nowadays, we see at least with our customers that historically infrastructure choices have been done by operation guys, and now we see more and more decisions are driven by the application by developers, which is a different job, right? And we end up into selecting a type of distributed architecture, as you mentioned, containers, microservices, serverless, and so on. But there are implications on the run phase of the application, which is, highly distributed, highly ephemeral, a hell lot of metadata associated to it. And then at the end, when you need to troubleshoot, because your business is now digital as a company, how you can troubleshoot a single request for Mr. Smith that is unhappy, how you collect all this data and you find the root causes of the issue. And that changed also the way your on-call system needs to work. It's no longer an ops problem, it's a DevOps problem. So developers needs to be part of it and so on. So I think in the introduction, you mentioned that the skills that you need to also train people to act as a support function and not only coding function and so on. So just adding, so that Lego make me think about the Jenga. So that's why I wanted to jump on that.
Let me interject with the mid-market perspective here. I think the mid-market customers are a little bit more skeptical about moving to the cloud because they fear a loss of control. When you put something away onto the cloud, so for them, cloud first means let's start with the low-hanging fruit. So typically what you find is they want to go with something like productivity applications, Microsoft, Office 365. I think that's kind of the starting point for them. I think some of the legacy applications in the mid-market probably will never go to the cloud for quite a while. These are small applications. These are not the SAPs or the Oracles of the world. And these applications, if you want to move them to the cloud, it's going to take a lot of effort, and the economics will just not support it. So I think the mid-market customers, like mid-sized manufacturers, are all up the Eastern Seaboard we've talked to. They love the cloud, they love the concept, but they say, let's kind of tread cautiously. So cloud first, I think resonates more in the enterprise. But the mid-market, tends to have a little bit more skeptical. I would like to say like cautious approach. I think they want to bring some caution to the table. They don't want to find themselves at sea with a vendor like AWS and unable to do anything. And so I think they are more willing to work with service providers and partners who can kind of shepherd them through the process. So you want to have a vendor who works with you, who's able to understand the lay of the land of the AWSs and the Azures of the world, but at the same time, kind of make it right size it for what they need and for their day-to-day operations. I think that's what I wanted to kind of speak about. I think there's a dichotomy in the market between enterprise and the rest of the segments, and I think that's something we've been able to glean from our customer conversations. We've seen that from the financial services, especially credit unions, which are very conservative buyers of technology. They tend to be on the laggard side. Mid-sized manufacturing companies, which have an IT footprint, but they are slowly migrating to the cloud. Migration is much lower than what you would expect on the enterprise side.
Yeah,
and we should maybe be careful. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just saying we should be careful about when we use cloud. I mean, public cloud is not the only way of using cloud.
Exactly.
Right? So very often we get confused, and yes, there is GCP, AWS, Azure, and so on. There's a lot of cloud providers that can do a lot of stuff for your company with different models when the service level is different and so on. You have hosting companies and so on. So there's a lot of different models, and very often we say cloud as equals public cloud, but just to mention that there's more options available.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would definitely echo that both multi-cloud and hybrid cloud, and for some complex customers, we see them having all of them, which is always an interesting challenge. But I mean, it's becoming more the reality today. But to add on to the cloud first piece a little bit, I think a little bit like the whole idea, it's not a provider. Just the statement cloud first doesn't make for your strategy. And I think that's part of it, is really thinking through, understanding what you need to do, why you're going to do it. It was said earlier, all the applications aren't going to fit into that. So what does that mean? And I think it was also mentioned earlier, a piece of any time you're moving, especially when something is going to be probably a fairly significant shift for the organization, the whole idea of organizational change management and really thinking through enablement. So you have to operationalize, but you have to look at how people are going to interpret this, how they're going to internalize it. We work with organizations where maybe it's cloud, or at least definitely a cloud push, and they were moving that direction. We have certain pieces, like maybe the infrastructure group, who already was absolutely overwhelmed, right? So they had their day job. Well, actually, a lot of times it was a day job and a night job that they were already doing. Now here comes cloud. They haven't been trained. They don't know how they're going to operate it. They're not familiar with the environment. And there's a little bit of fear, uncertainty, doubt butt in for them. So how do they interpret that? How do they work through that? They were probably well positioned to help move that forward, but thinking that through from a organizational and a change standpoint can certainly help you do that a little bit easier. So if you're going to go cloud first, I think you have to understand the implications and sort of all of those lower level pieces that need to come in to play to make that successful and for you to get the maximum ROI on that investment. So, all right, so I'll go ahead and move us on to the next discussion point. So one thing we have, and I think we started to talk about it a little bit earlier, with a lot of the move to public cloud, there's some talk of cloud repatriation. What do we think that looks like, and what does that mean, and why may that be happening?
I can try to start again. I've been looking into this one for quite a while to try to figure out what is going on, because when you look at the market, every statistic you see indicates the cloud is just growing, and what is non-cloud is more like stable, even the next 5 years out in the future. But when you try to investigate what is actually going on, we can see that some customers 2-3 years ago, they really rush into cloud, and they did what we talked about before, lift and shift, and they simply just moved things into cloud as fast as they could. But legacy is legacy wherever you run it, even in the public cloud. And we're analyzing a lot of these workloads to try to figure out how much of the workload in public cloud are actually virtual machines and just normal storage. And it turns out that it's just below 50% that is, virtual machines and normal storage. And suddenly, when you see the price per gigabyte, or if you see the price for a virtual machine running an application that you are maybe not, that virtual machine, you're not utilizing it 100%, then you suddenly realize that it's 3 to 4 times more expensive. And I came across a survey from Scandinavia indicating that 50% of all workloads are now bouncing back to the data center. And out of these 50% bouncing back, 36% will end up in a private cloud. Not in the old architecture that they have had for many years, but people tend to look for a private cloud, and 14% is reallocated in public cloud for some reason that makes sense for the company. And that journey is quite interesting, because we have seen, and we've done more than 1,200 data center assessment, and they are all indicating that if you run in the old legacy environment, your utilization of CPU, memory, network connectivity, and storage is really low. But if you go into a private cloud, where you get the same kind of capability, where you have a self-service portal that can spin up things, you can basically reduce, in average, about 33% of the total cost of ownership of having the old legacy architecture. For some reason, people are looking at that one, and they try to look at that one as, can I use containers? Can I use that private cloud as a hybrid cloud one that can open up for me to begin move into public cloud again? But I was quite surprised about it. And I would also say I came across another statistics we have done, where we have seen what is the gigabyte price in public cloud. And it turns out that the gigabyte price from 2014 is the one that public cloud still have. They have simply managed to terminate Moore's law. And the gap between, Moore's law and where we are as a vendor compared to a gigabyte price in public cloud is becoming so big that, the gap is basically a huge opportunity for private cloud. So I think there will be some sort of a balance between, public cloud and private cloud. And it looks like that, those two are the one that I see will be part of the future in the data center.
I think it's a sticker shock. I mean, people just go willy-nilly into the cloud. And as Tom mentioned, if you take an application and just do a lift and shift, that application is running all the time. And so you're incurring cloud costs every day. Whereas in an on-premise environment, it runs when it needs to run. So people have completely lost track. I think they see the economics of moving to the cloud and use when you need it, but there is CPU cycles and storage being used all the time. And the moment you get your first monthly bill from AWS or Azure or whoever, then you realize that this thing could have been running in a couple of boxes in your data center, and that's the key here. And I think I went to the same statistic that Tom mentioned. I think it was an IDC seminar which talked about the Nordics, folks in the Nordics really going back to the on-premise environment. Yeah. I mean, that's a classic case.
Well, as we talk about statistics, I would like to share one. I was quite surprised to see it, and it's from HIS Market in 2019. It's a company that does surveys for different vendors. And of the 350 companies they surveyed, 74% had moved an application into the cloud and then move it back into their own infrastructure. I was quite surprised with the number. Again, it's statistics, but the idea is that is there, right? It's a two-way, it's a bidirectional highway with the cloud, right? And I was surprised with it. And again, it doesn't mean that they reversed all their cloud deployments, right? Just that there are cases where there is a bidirectional movement. And when they asked the respondent about the factors driving why they repatriated, I don't know how to say that in English, why they moved back the workloads, the top two responses were performance and security. Yeah. So just to share some interesting statistics, and to your point also on the cost, I will give you an example from my previous life when I was working as a cloud provider. There is a moment when you do the costing. So I was doing day in, day out costing with the CFO and so on to define the price of our services. But there is a moment when if your customer is big enough, and the overall infrastructure is dedicated to the customer, it's always cheaper for the customer to use it internally, because it keeps paying. But on the other side, when you own it and the amortization period is done and you repurpose the hardware and so on, you start having some savings that you don't have when you're on the variable charges. So I used to have a huge social network as a customer. So there's not a lot of those. One of them that was hosted in a company that I was working on, I decided to build a new data center and move out to the cloud and build their own infrastructure because they're big enough to own everything and save a lot of money. Again, that's not every case, every company, but when you are in a big enterprise, you need to think about the cost implications. That's also something to keep in mind.
Maybe just, oh, sorry. Just one quick thing on the repatriation back and forth. And I think about Tom's like strategy document, that some of the audience members might be creating right now. Just realize like moving things back and forth is actually a good sign. Like that actually can be a sign that you have a healthy process running. Knowing that you've tried something in the cloud, it didn't work, or you found, the economics work better on-prem. I just want to emphasize that, that could mean that your strategy is actually working well. And one thing I would just remind is like, there's sometimes models of like, where am I developing, and then where's my production happening? And sometimes if you have a cloud first strategy, you think, okay, well, I'm going to do all my DevOps maybe locally here, and then we'll do production in the cloud. It can flip. It can be the other way around. The cloud gives you options where you can try different infrastructures, different platforms, different configurations of containers or compute layers. It gives you just, so many more options to, try different deployments. And then maybe you find one, and then you bring it back for production that's local as well. So be flexible with that, that idea as well. The cloud isn't just for, massive scale and massive production. It can be for small things that I'm going to do dev tests and then bring it back. Absolutely.
Just one housekeeping. I think we should let the audience tee up their questions now. I know we've been talking for about 30 minutes. If anybody in the audience has questions, we'd invite you to put them in the Q&A box so that we can address them as we speak. I think we have spoken for 30 minutes, and we'd like to hear from the audience, what their concerns are, and kind of address them during the panel as we speak. So I just want to kind of give them a heads up to kind of tee up their questions as we speak. Go ahead, Terry.
All right. So I'll add on a little bit to the workloads moving around. So I'll agree with the last point that sometimes now they may start where that strategy was sort of pick a provider and lift and shift, which is one way to get there, but they evolve and they mature. So regardless of whether it was pick a provider and lift and shift, or you had a more practiced strategy or methodical strategy, what we are seeing, and I think is again a healthy thing, is that they are maturing, and those environments are maturing and changing overall as the cloud environment matures into things like multi-cloud and hybrid cloud. So we see a lot of customers who may have really tried to move in that direction and done a lift and shift, and they're trying to figure that out, trying to now put a strategy in place. But some of what sometimes pushes that is they're now looking at, hey, I really need to figure out how to work in a hybrid, or in many cases, I need to be able to work in multi-cloud, which would include my private plus multiple public clouds. And that's happening, it seems to be, for a variety of reasons. Some really complex organizations, you've got M&A, and just by the nature of the way these organizations come together, they're supporting everything that's out there. One thing that I am seeing organizations start to look at, even ones that may be either just starting to think through their strategy and pick that provider, or ones that have that provider and are trying to figure out how to move things around. The other thing they're considering is, I want flexibility to either have multiple or to minimize vendor lock-in. And that seems to be more of a concern. So even if they're not going to directly go multi-cloud, they're thinking and building in those capabilities now so that they have the flexibility in the future. So, and I think that's a sign of strategies that are maturing, cloud operations that are starting to mature, and a better understanding of what the environment may mean and how you may have to support that as it gets more complex. So maybe let's talk about What's driving hybrid cloud, and what do we think is the outcome?
Yeah, but before we do that, I'd just like to say a single thing, a kind of a feedback. What we are actually talking about here is the cloud exit strategy. It really needs to be part of the overall, strategy that you create when you go into that cloud, because otherwise, you could end up in a vendor lock-in. And I came across a big tele provider that decided to move all these phone calls record into public cloud. And then suddenly, after they moved all these small records in, they realized that they need to search and find records once in a while. And touching all these data is very expensive because you have to pay every time you touch it. So they basically couldn't move it back because it would take too long and it's not easy to do. So they ended up like doing an index internal they could search in. And this is not the way cloud is supposed to be. It's a workaround, but you shouldn't actually put yourself in that corner. It's so important that you have that exit strategy. Otherwise, you could really end up in a kind of a vendor lock-in. And I guess no customer would actually like that.
Well, I'll be French for a second, if you allow me, guys. I think every company is trying to do lock-in. To be totally honest, right? Even if you are a bank, you want to keep your customers, you want to retain your customers. That's the idea of the business. But you need to do it in a clean way, I would say. So give all the information so people can make a proper decision to get out or stay in, and everybody is doing that. And what I found is interesting when we talk about the cloud is that even the big public cloud providers, now they're acknowledging that this is happening. And they try to go into on-premises. I was surprised to see that in December 2018 already, AWS was announcing to make a cloud hardware platform for companies that they can use on-premises. So we see the cloud is coming on-premises now. Everybody is going in all the directions. So is that a way to be locked in? I don't know, but again, that's a normal, behavior. But it's something, as you say, Tom, you need to be very conscious and have always an exit strategy. And I would like to, on that topic, to talk about some myth about the multi-cloud. And very often we think that getting an hybrid multi-cloud, when I have different public cloud vendors and I can move my workloads around as easy as a click, that's, for me, it's a myth. And very often we think I have containers. So containers, everything I need is in a container. So it's okay. They are ephemeral. That doesn't matter. I can lift and shift them from on-premises to this cloud to this other cloud and so on. The reality is very often very different because there's a lot of security concerns when you're defining the configuration of the containers. The fact that the lifetime of a container does impact you in a way that, do you have now the tools, your APM tool, your monitoring tool, do they capture this information because they're going too fast, yes or no? Because then you have blind on what's going on. And how can you guarantee availability and performance of the application? And so on and so on. There's a lot of constraints around the containers, load balancers, storage, again, security, and so on. And all this stuff is required to make the container work. So it's not just clicking and move it. That's not as easy as that. So again, it's something that you need to be conscious and get as maximum of information and plan it and get data about it so you can run it smoothly and get the full benefits of what the cloud is providing, without the creating security issues or availability issues, because there's a lot of unknowns. That's why people now is talking about observability. Now do I get observability in the cloud, right? Because there's too many unknowns. So that's what the point I wanted to highlight in this multi-cloud and hybrid cloud, and to be careful about.
Yeah, but I would sort of add that, it's interesting. We've been talking about how it is a complex move from going into the cloud and being prepared and figuring out how you operate in the cloud, and your organization can handle that. And clients and organizations are working that through. When you add the containerization, because that's almost, it's its own ecosystem and it's its own set of operational changes and how you manage and what you do. So, they all tie together, but I think it reinforces that importance of really understanding how are you going to enable this within your organization, and having that solid strategy and then a plan for how you're actually going to make that happen. So
I totally agree. And I would also say that when you look into the market, container is really appealing to use, but also very complex. So when it comes to, orchestration and management and moving containers between different kind of cloud providers, that's a whole new market that is emerging. And the market will be about 1 billion 2 to 3 years from now. So the vendor that actually comes up with a Kubernetes service where you can move containers between different cloud vendors without being an expert seems to be, what people are looking for, because that will remove some of the complexity, and you really need to think in security from end to end. It's not something you put on top. It's actually something you need to look at from end to end, and it needs to be portable and it needs to be manageable to do. So I totally agree. It's a little bit immature, but I think, it's over the next 2-3 years, I think that market will scale, and we will begin to see software vendors come up with solutions where you can spin it up on VMware, Red Hat, SUSE, Amazon, whatever. And that market is quite interesting to follow. So I think that the container one is adding a couple of things to the data center. VMware with virtualization gave consolidation and optimization, but containers are giving portability, and it's faster to spin up and shut down an application, and the resources it uses is 1/10 of a virtual machine. So there is cost reduction. You can get far more out of your investment in infrastructure if you go in that direction. So I totally get why people are beginning to look at it. And I can also, as a CTO, I can see that some of the big CPU vendors are looking at putting management of containers into the CPU, maybe 4 or 5 years out in the future. But that kind of technology is just around the corner and will happen. So, we have had virtualization with VMware for 20 years. I think we will keep VMware for the next 15 years, but, we will keep looking at containers as something that is more appealing going forward. It gives flexibility, but there are things that we need to fix before it really can be deployed.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Just on the complexity thing is that, as you mentioned, so you get this flexibility, but on the other end, the huge amount of data that this is generating to understand your application, this is now that something a human cannot consume anymore. Your team cannot consume this amount of events, incidents, tickets, you name it. So adopting this, so what you're saving on one side, you need to invest it in maybe artificial intelligence and machine learning to make your support team become Iron Man. So they have this protection shield that find the anomalies for you among all this highly distributed and ephemeral architecture that can reduce the amount of noise to find what are the real incidents that you have, that can tell you what is the root cause and not just the symptoms, because the amount of containers and microservices that you are running, it's impressive. And this is something that now a human cannot consume anymore without an assistance of machine learning, for instance, just to add on that.
Yep. Well, and I'll add that and segue us to the next topic. Yeah, definitely, and especially on the DevOps side, where we look at that. When you take cloud and DevOps and all the data that's being produced that you can leverage, being able to actually leverage that, do it in a meaningful way, in a way that can help you action, drive action and improve what you're doing is an important capability. So let's talk. We talked a lot about the strategy and sort of different platforms, hybrid, multiple. Let's talk about what capabilities the IT teams need to think about as they're moving and driving into the cloud world and maturing their cloud capabilities. Maybe we start with automation. Any thoughts on automation or infrastructure as code?
Daniel, do you want to take this?
Yeah, well, I'll start. I'll kick us off. So we see that, especially when you start to bring the idea of DevOps concepts and apply those throughout, where you're building things up and you can sort of drive now through automation, through doing everything as code, which includes your infrastructure, your cloud infrastructure, and even applying the idea of ephemeral. So when you take those together, the idea of putting automation, which connects to all your various pieces, you do it as code that can be called through automation. It really enables you to do things like ephemeral environments. We had a client, just as an example, that brought these capabilities together. We sort of helped them through this journey and built this out for them. But they literally went from static environment, this was in AWS, static environment. It took them roughly 8 days to go through that process of getting it and doing the tests they want, and then they had to sort of sequentialize those. In the end, all that went to as code. It was all codified. All that, and that included multiple VPC, multiple backup databases, 21 applications. That infrastructure was stood up on request, based on a pull request entirely. All the applications were taken and deployed. The test infrastructure was set up and built. The test cases and testing automation was all implied, and it was executed. And it took about an hour in the end to go from what was 8 days to an hour. But that took a lot of work to bring automation, which is a different capability than a lot of teams are used to having, thinking in the terms of doing even infrastructure as code and applying things like the SEM, version control and that mindset. And if you change it in the code, not directly on whether it's cloud or otherwise. And the idea of not just being cloud, not just maybe having a VM that you run out there and then shut down, but actually one that's purpose-built and only executes during its task and then goes back and goes away. So other thoughts on that?
Yeah, if I could speak on that. One of the things that we construct here at HashiCorp is something that we call the cloud operating model, which basically gives companies some sort of guidance on, what sort of like considerations they should take into when they're transitioning into the cloud. And we put that into 4 layers. And the first layer is the provisioning layer, which is the operations layer. And with provisioning, we got infrastructure as code. And the infrastructure layer transitions from running dedicated service at a limited scale to a dynamic environment where organizations can easily adjust to increased demand by spinning up thousands of servers and scaling them up and down when not in use. And as architectures and services become more distributed, the sheer volume of compute nodes increase significantly. Some of the examples that we bring about is, Terraform, there's applications like, CloudFormation and, Cloud Deployment Management and Resource Manager in these cloud providers. So that's the first layer that we consider. There's other layers like security, where security layer transitions from its fundamentally high trust world enforced by a strong perimeter and firewall to a low trust or zero trust environment with no clear or static perimeter. So as a result, the foundational assumption for security shifts from being IP-based to using identity access to resources. So this shift is highly disruptive to traditional security models. And the other 2 layers are the networking and the runtime environment. The networking layer transitions from being heavily dependent on the physical location and IP address of services and applications to using a dynamic registry of services for discovery, segmentation, and composition. An enterprise IT team does not have the same control over the network or the physical locations of the compute resource, and must think about service security. The runtime layer, which shifts from deploying artifacts to a static application server to deploying applications with a scheduler atop a pool of infrastructure, which is provision on demand. In addition, new applications have become collections of services that are dynamically provisioned and packaged in multiple ways, from virtual machines to containers. So these are the layers that we try to kind of promote and kind of show it to companies that are considering in moving to the cloud. And obviously, you spoke about the provision layer, which is the infrastructure as code. I'll let the others chime in.
What we are finding in the mid-market is transitioning from an IT ops to a DevOps environment. I think that's the first transition people want to make, because traditional IT ops was develop, test, deploy, and that model has changed completely. And just getting the mindset around how do we move towards a new DevOps where it's infrastructure as code. A code is changing probably by every week. How do you move towards a DevOps model? I think that's some of the transition that some of the mid-market companies are struggling with, because they've been used to the traditional IT ops, and DevOps is a whole new paradigm shift. There's change management involved. There's people who need to understand new skill sets and new ways of doing IT, and that's where we see a fundamental transition happening. And that's where vendors need to kind of educate the marketplace, so to speak. We do have a question, but I think it's a question I think we can hold off till the end. But let's move ahead, Terry. I think that's all we have. I think we have one more topic to move ahead to, I think.
So last topic, so we've talked about the strategy, we've talked about sort of capabilities that come along with driving through your cloud strategy and maturing your cloud operations, governance, and other areas. What about aspects of cloud cost management? And that's one we've already touched on a lot. I think we've all heard it as we're working with clients and organizations out there that thought it was going to be the big money. It's going to be cheaper. And then all of a sudden they're staring at an ever increasing cost. And oftentimes that's an operational cost, which they're not even sure how to handle compared to what they used to do. So what do clients and organizations need to consider from a cloud cost and cloud cost management standpoint?
Let me kick us off there. I think you need to have a holistic view of what's involved. I think in addition to, there are many categories of costs that people need to consider. One is procurement. Procuring the cloud services for the relevant vendor and putting the governance in place in terms of procuring the services. Cost of migration, migrating applications that are relevant for the cloud, moving them to the cloud. Maintaining legacy debt. Now, legacy debt can be both applications and infrastructure. So people underestimate how much of legacy debt has to be considered when you're moving to the cloud. Training costs, they can be significant. Although many of the cloud vendors are subsidizing training costs these days, if you have to put a training program in place, I think that could be a significant item on your bill when you consider. Change management is the other aspect that people are not considering as much, because there is a behavioral change when you move to the cloud. And change management typically involves bringing in a third-party vendor who can kind of help you shepherd you through the process, and that involves costs, and that involves time and productivity hits, because you're going through a change as far as your IT is concerned. So I think those are some of the kind of the key areas you need to look at. Many of the vendors have started to put into enablers. So for example, you have AWS Cost Explorer, which kind of helps you kind of gauge, what your costs are going to be as you move forward, and kind of help you forecast costs. But I'd be curious to hear what other people have to say. We have had to actually come up with a cost framework for almost each client we serve. But I'd be curious to hear what other people have to say on the subject.
Yeah,
I can add the category maybe. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I can add a category on that, which is the hidden costs. We have seen that for customers that were monitoring their multi-cloud environment, and then they found very interesting costs about resources that are no longer used but still up and running that they are charged for. Discovering that some services are talking from one zone to another zone, and in fact the cost of network between zones are way more expensive and so on. They shouldn't, or they would have moved things. Even strange things about IP addresses. There is some public cloud providers that they give you some static IP addresses for free as long as you use them. But when you're decommissioning a VM or whatever, and you don't decommission, because most of people doesn't do that, the IP addresses, they start charging you for the IP because you're retaining an IP that you don't use. And overall, we find customers that this amount of hidden resources are more than $100,000 a year. So we're not talking about $5 or stuff like that. So the bigger the company, the bigger your cloud, the more likely you will find a lot of hidden costs in the infrastructure just waiting there, and you're just paying for and not using as another one.
Yeah, I would definitely echo that. And I think there's multiple layers when you start to think about cost. One, again, if you're starting your strategy or at least readdressing it, it's important to take some of those things into account. We like to think of it overall from a cost standpoint if you can start strong. So in the beginning, if you can really start that journey with a solid foundation, you can set realistic expectations. You do those 6 R's, a rationalization, right? You really understand, what should I move? How should I move it? When should I move it? Even addressing things like technical debt, right? If you have a problem now, don't propagate that into the cloud, which, to everybody's point, can be more expensive, and iterate on it. Understand that you're likely going to have to go through this in multiple iterations and change and improve it. And then once you do get it going, you're sort of getting it up and going. What we've talked about already, getting governance, getting things in place. If you have dev environments but your dev team's only working 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., well, why do you have those up and running all the time? There's things you can figure out and do from a governance, is what's allowed in. Operationally, what do you put in place to minimize some of those costs? I think somebody talked about visibility and observability. How do you get visibility? There's tools, there's different ways to do that. Looking at things like different multi-cloud. And then there's technical things you can do, like we talked about ephemeral, the idea of toggling or right sizing or refactoring. And the softer side, which we were just talking about, changing behaviors. One, especially from few old days past, it was porting, right? If I got an environment, I was never going to let that environment go. It's getting used to the fact that these can come and go much more quickly, because we can set them up and get what you have or need rapidly, rather than it being weeks or months. And growing your people. And another part that often is forgotten about is the cloud services and the different providers, pricing can be very complex. So understanding what advantages, things like spot instances and things like that, taking full advantage of what is there, but that's part of maturing your practice.
And I would add that, when you look at procurement, it used to be something you do every 3 years in an organization when you buy infrastructure, software, and so on. But procurement is suddenly something you do on a daily basis, because you need to have a look at the cloud pricing, and cloud pricing is going up and down every day. And I came across a global customer who said, we got 9 people in procurement now, only looking at the price in public cloud to make sure that we get the right benefit out of it. So there's technology into it, and you need to have the capability to see the pricing and understand it, but you also need to have the right organization to handle all this pricing. And a crazy one we got was a customer that said, I gave up. I bought an ELA agreement with a big public cloud provider. I can't really control it. I don't know if it's a good deal or bad deal, but that was what I did. And yeah.
And I think setting up, we talked about starting it with and having building iteration in. I think that's a great point, because the cloud providers are maturing as well, right? So they're changing their model. They have new things that are coming. There's new technologies that come available. So it is something you truly have to operate, right? It's not sort of, put it out and forget. You need to keep on top and have your cloud operation maturity growing. And that's everything from, how you provision and everything else we talked about, to pricing, all the way, to that end of the spectrum.
Terry, just one quick thing on that. You mentioned about growing the people, and I think Srinivasan talked about the education and training. I can almost guarantee you, for every CIO listening right now, your training budget is too small. You're not sufficiently put enough money there. You get so much leverage out of that, because if you're talking about any of these changes, these transformations, people have to know what tools they're working with. People have to know what capabilities are out there. And the best way to do that is, the training programs, the certifications, work with a really good channel partner that can help you with that. But I can almost guarantee you, everyone out there, your training budget is too small.
Yep. Yeah, we see that very much so. And it goes back, we talked about the idea of OCM, organizational change management, applying good change management to that, and really helping people through that process, that, if they're using new tools or platforms, but there's process change. So providing that training, maybe it's pilot projects, time for them to learn and grow into it, rather than be in the middle of the battle trying to figure it out, just increases your likelihood for success.
Gents, we have a question. Let me just rephrase the question here. I think it is an awareness drive that is required to move mid-level companies to use the cloud. On one side, the IT support companies want to make money by offering support for on-premise solutions. Private cloud providers offer lower cost per meg, and major public cloud providers don't want to reduce the rates. how do you plan to handle the scenario? Everyone wants to make a profit. Let me take this up because it's a mid-market question. I think that's why the reason for us for existing is to kind of help you navigate the land. So we have partnerships with Amazon and Microsoft. We also have partnerships with mid-sized companies, which are MSPs, which are able to right-size these solutions for the mid-market. And I think it's something that customers are actively looking as an ombudsman who can come in and say, what makes sense for them? Do we need to move this and have a relationship with AWS, or is it an MSP that we need to be working with? Who can help us bring the benefits of AWS or the cloud provider of choice and help them kind of navigate this. I think that's why, as mentioned early on, it's better to get a partner when you're on your cloud journey. And the cloud journey is if you have a partner, it makes it much more exciting, number one, and much more productive journey rather than doing it alone.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I know we're at our time. So I think that's all the questions we have. And any last comments from the panel? All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us. We appreciate you taking the time to join us in this discussion. Thank you to the panel for a very lively and informative discussion. We appreciate you attending, and have a great day. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Terry, for being the host.
All right. Thank you.
You.
Bye.